Look at verse 10. Because this earthly covenant stood only in meat and drink and washings and carnal ordinances imposed on the people of God until, and there's a very interesting word here in the Authorized Bible, imposed until the time of Reformation. Now, to us, the Reformation was the breakaway from the Catholic Church 500 years ago. But here, they're using the same, Paul's using the same expression until the time when everything would be changed, reformed, changed. And I want you to notice this, that when Christ came, he put an end to the old and opened a whole new dispensation. Verse 11. It says, Christ, who became and came as a high priest, but a high priest in anticipation, this was in his life, he came in anticipation of the new covenant that would be greater, more perfect, and even the tabernacle would now no longer be made with hands. That is, as Paul says, not of this building, not built like these. And in this, he is referencing both the tabernacle in the wilderness, as we would call it, and David's temple. So these were made with hands, and the sacrifice was made with hands. Do you get it? Under the old covenant, the sacrifices were made by men. The temple was made by men. But now you see something different in verse 12. So that now no longer are the blood of goats and calves sufficient. And verse 12 is absolutely clear. Under the new covenant, which when Jesus was born didn't happen. Remember, this can only happen after 33 years. Because if you look at this, in verse 13, well, in verse 12, it says, not by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood. Have you got it? By his own blood, he entered in once into the holy place, having already obtained an eternal redemption for us. Now we have a high priest who is the Son of God, who is not only high priest, but he is also the sacrifice. So now it's no longer bulls, sheep, goats, or whatever. Those are passed away. They were only for a time. Now, they were only a picture. Get it right. These Old Testament offerings, sacrifices, tabernacle were only a brief picture or vision of what one day would come with Christ. So, in verse 13, if the blood of bulls and of goats and the ashes of a heifer, sprinkling the unclean, sanctified and purified the flesh, verse 14, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot, like the lamb, without blemish? You know, the sacrifice had to be without blemish. He, without blemish before God, offered himself to God in order to change our experience and to clear our conscience from all the deadness of the old works, that we could now serve directly the living God. And in verse 15, that's why Christ has become not just a high priest. Notice the word now being used. For this cause, he is the mediator of the New Testament. In other words, the mediator is someone who comes between us. It comes between us and God. And he was to become the mediator, the means by which we can access this new covenant, the New Testament. And it's very interesting the way Paul expresses it, because he says, he is the mediator of this New Testament, that by means of the death for the redemption of the transgressions that were under the First Testament, that they which are called might receive the promise of an eternal inheritance. Look at verse 16. I think it explains it even better. For where a testimony is, there must also of necessity be the death of the testator. This is a will, testament, will. We know what that is. When somebody dies, they leave a will to dispose of their assets and decide where it goes to. I mean, many of you know my wife died more than 8 years ago, and she and I had the same type of wills, that when she died, everything came to me. If I died first, everything went to her. Everything. Now, strangely enough, what my wife and I did is a perfect picture of what Christ has done. Because when he died, through his death, his testament, his will, gives us the right to inherit everything that he had. You know, this is something that somehow is something the church doesn't seem to understand. A lot of preachers don't seem to understand. Certainly, state churches don't seem to understand this, that because Christ died, the testament, the will that he left, means that we inherit through him all that he had. His power, his blessing, his relationship with his Father. Oh, I could take a long time on going into explain this. Do you understand? You see, in verse 17 it says, this testament or will is of force only after men are dead.